called To Come Back, and I'm glad that you decided to come back. And even if this is your first time here, I'm glad that you're here. I trust that you'll be encouraged as a result of your time here together today. So we said last week that we like comeback stories, right? How many of you like comeback stories, right? Just most of us, unless you're on the opposite end of a comeback story, right? And you blew it, and you had a large lead, and all of a sudden that lead is no longer a large lead. And next thing you know, you find out that you lost the game because the other team came back. Yeah, so for the most part, we like comeback stories. And I'm reminded of a comeback story. This happened a few years ago, and it's actually one of the greatest comebacks of all time in sports history. It was January 3rd, 1993. Whoa! Okay, you guys are skipping ahead of me. Okay, any Buffalo Bills fans? It's like our greatest moment was 1993. That's not a good sign, right? 1993. As soon as I say January 3rd comeback, 1993, you're like, oh, Buffalo Bills. Yeah, Buffalo Bills. They were in the playoffs. Remember those years? They were in the playoffs, and they were down. They were playing the Houston Oilers, down by 32 points. 32 points, right? And down 32, Frank Reich came in. He replaced the injured Jim Kelly, and he led them on the comeback. In fact, it's one of the greatest comebacks of all time. In fact, it is the largest comeback in NFL history. I don't know if you knew that. But 1993. Anybody remember that game? A few of us? Yeah, like half the hands. Some of you've never raised your hand in church at all, ever. And it's like, yeah, I remember that. Yeah, it's like, that's right. You just volunteered for something, too. Just so you know, we're keeping track. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, 1993, the comeback, the Buffalo Bills and Frank Reich. That's pretty awesome. What you may not know is that Frank Reich did nearly the same thing in college football. I don't know if you knew that. In college football, 1984, he came off the bench, once again, not as a starter, came off the bench, and he erased a 31-point deficit. And that was the largest comeback in college football until 2006. In fact, he earned the name the Comeback Kid. That's pretty cool, isn't it? Pretty cool, Frank Reich. What do you know? It gets even more interesting. After Frank Reich led professional football, he actually became a pastor. I don't know if you knew that. That's pretty awesome. Became a pastor, and eventually he became the president of a seminary. So that's pretty cool. Reformed Theological Seminary. But guess what he's doing now? That's right, coaching. He made another comeback. This is pretty cool. He made a comeback to the NFL as the head coach of the Indianapolis Colts just this past February. And by the way, the Colts, they started off this season with 1 win and 5 losses in the first 6 games. 1 and 5. And they made another comeback. They won 9 out of the next 10 games and actually made the playoffs against all odds. Unfortunately, they lost yesterday. I was actually rooting for them. I was like, man, just do it for my sermon, would you? Come on! Yeah, so disappointing. But the bright side is we had at least one Buffalo Bill in the playoffs this year. So we got that. See, comebacks are awesome, right? Comebacks are awesome. And here's the thing. The thing about comebacks is they happen when you least expect it, and they happen when you're in the biggest hole, right? When you're down. That's the whole idea behind a comeback. See, truth be told, comebacks happen when you're losing somewhere. For the Buffalo Bills, they were down 32 points. They were losing the game. They were in a hole that seemed impossible to climb out of. In fact, no other team in NFL history since then or before then had ever overcome such a deficit. That's what makes it a comeback. Comebacks, I believe, are similar in life. They happen when we find ourselves losing in some area of our lives, when we're not winning, when things aren't going well, when we find ourselves in a hole that seems like it's impossible to climb out of. That's when comebacks tend to show up. And unfortunately, comebacks start out in a place where we're far, far away from where we ever wanted to be. Right? They start out when we're in a distant place from where we first started. And unfortunately, that distant place is further than we ever thought possible and further than we ever wanted to be in our lives. So how is it that we find ourselves in those situations? And I think it's a good opportunity for us to kind of reflect, and perhaps you can think of a situation in your life where either you've been in a distant place, you've been far from God, you've been far from a relationship. There's been something that's been so distant where you've been losing in life. And you can think about some of those moments, some of those down times where you feel like you're in a hole, you're in a pit, and it doesn't seem like there's any way out. In those moments, you think about, how did we get so far away from where we actually ever wanted to be? And I believe it's because at one point or another, it's because we believed a lie. Here's where I'm going with this. I think that this is the lie. I think we believe this lie that chasing after something will satisfy me. We find ourselves kind of losing because we feel that if I just have this one thing, that chasing after, you name it, you fill in the blank, whatever that thing is, that if I can just chase after this thing, and it's going to be different for each of us, if I can just chase after this one thing, then I will finally be satisfied. And then once you get that one thing, you find out that you're not that satisfied. Right? Sometimes we believe that lie. Man, if I can just do this, I'm going to be happy. If I can just have this one thing, I'm going to be happy, or that my life will be better. If I can achieve this one thing, I'm going to be successful. If I chase after this thing in my life will be complete, and I will finally be satisfied. But let's be honest. For many of us, we achieved that one thing, and it didn't satisfy. Right? In fact, we're just a couple of weeks after Christmas, and many of you probably had some stuff on your Christmas wish list, and you got some of those things, and now you've had them for a couple of weeks, and now you're like, I need another list. I need some more stuff, because we don't satisfy very easily, do we? We always want more. We always crave after more. We're always chasing after more. So I believe it's a lie for us to think that chasing after whatever is going to satisfy me. In fact, it's a lie as old as time itself. You go all the way back to the Garden of Eden, and Satan tempted Adam and Eve with a lie. And the lie was this, Genesis 3:5. This is what Satan said to Adam and Eve. He said, "For God knows that when you eat from it being the thing that they were tempted by, the thing that they chased after, right? They saw this tree and they're like, man, that looks pretty good. I think it's going to be helpful. It's going to make my life better somehow, right? And it's pleasing to the eye. It's desirable, So Satan said, listen, God knows that when you eat from it, that thing that you're chasing after, that your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. So he lied to them. He said, listen, if you do this, hey, things are going to be better. If you can just have that one thing, whatever that one thing is, your life will finally be complete. And you know what Satan did is he lied to them. And he said, listen, God is holding out on you. That's essentially what he was saying. God doesn't want you to be like him. He's holding out on you. And so he's like, hey, let me give you some advice. I want you to do things my way, and you'll have everything. You'll get the fruit that you're chasing after, and you'll have knowledge. You'll have all this stuff. You can be like God. And in other words, what Satan was saying is, listen, God is the barrier between you and your freedom. And if you just chase after that thing that you're longing for, your life will be better. And unfortunately, Adam and Eve, the thing that they chose to chase after, that thing that they thought would satisfy them, when they ate it, it took a bite out of them as well. When they did, they immediately found themselves in a distant place. They were separated from their Heavenly Father who loved them so much. And that story has been repeated over and over and over and over again throughout generations, because we've bought a lie that says if I can just chase after this thing, it will finally make me satisfied. Here in Luke 15, we read a similar story. This is another father and son story, just like Adam and his heavenly Father, right? This is another father and son story where the father and son are separated because of the disillusionment that chasing after the wrong thing had created. Luke chapter 15, page 849, if you're using one of our Bibles. Luke chapter 15, 849. If you don't have a Bible, we'd love for you to have that Bible that's in your pew. Go ahead and take it. Unless it's your neighbor's Bible, you might want to ask them. He's like, well, it's in my pew, so it's mine. Sorry, pastor said I could have it. If that's the case, you should probably just give it to him. We'll get you another one, right? So Luke chapter 15. Now, just a reminder from last week, this story that Jesus is about to tell is really part 3 of a string of comeback stories. You know, he's already told a story about a lost sheep that was found. The second story was a story about a lost coin that was found. And then this is the third story, and it's about a lost son that is about to be found. And it's kind of a familiar story to many of us, but there's some deep meaning in here. And I want us to kind of dive into this. In Luke 15, beginning of verse 11, it says this, that Jesus continued that there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, Father, give me my share of the estate. So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all that he had, and he set off for a distant country, and there he squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. And he longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, and that's kind of a turning point, when he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and I'll go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. Then here's the comeback. So he got up and he went to his father. Of course, the story goes on from there, and over the next few weeks we'll kind of reveal more parts of the story. But in this text there are several different scenes, and what I want to do today is I want us just to focus on the first scene, found in verses 11 through 13. So I'm going to kind of read that, give you a little bit of insights, and then we're going to enjoy some other incredible moments in our time today as we look at a video and look at another story in Scripture. It's going to be an awesome time, I promise you. So in Luke chapter 11, or Luke chapter 15, it starts out this way, that Jesus continued, there was a man who had 2 sons. And I kind of like how it just says, a man who had 2 sons. He doesn't give them names. And as I was reading that, I was like thinking, you know, like any of our names would have worked in this story. Right? There's no names given. But there's a chance that some of our names, we could have put our name in the story as either one of the 2 sons, and we'll talk about the second son here in a few weeks. But there's this man, and he has 2 sons. And the younger one says to his father, Father, give me my share of the estate. So he divided his property between them. I want us to think about this just a little bit. Think about the background here. Think about this scenario. Think about what the son is asking for. He's asking for his inheritance early. He's asking for his inheritance before his father is even dead. Do you realize how incredibly insulting this is in what it really communicates? It's essentially saying, Dad, I wish you were dead because all I want is my money. And I want it now. That's what it's communicating. I wish you were dead. Wish you were out of the picture. I don't care what culture it is. That's disrespectful in any culture, right? That's dishonoring to the father. In fact, this was such a disgraceful request that a father would have been expected to beat his son. Or perhaps cut him off from the inheritance entirely. And then he'd be disowned by the father. He'd be written off as dead by the father. In fact, we read later on in verse 24, the father says, my son was dead. Right? He was disowned. He was he was estranged. In fact, it would have been fairly common in that culture to have an actual funeral for somebody like this son who had done such a disgraceful thing for the way that he treated his family. The relationship between the father and the son had been severed. And once disowned by the father, there was almost no way for a rebellious child to come back and regain his position in the family. If he wanted back at all, he'd have to make full restitution for everything that he had done. And even then, he lost his position and he lost his future blessing. It was over for him. And so this son, he asked for his share of the inheritance. And being the younger son, that would have been 1/3 of the father's estate. Everything he owned, all of the land, all of his possessions, all of his money, his savings and everything, 1/3. And that's because the older son in that culture would have received a double portion. So he would have gotten 2/3 of the inheritance. In verse 13 we see this, that not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, and he set off for a distant country, and he squandered his wealth in wild living. Now, what does that mean? He got together all that he had. Well, one commentary says this about this phrase, he got together all that he had. It means that he turned it all into cash. So he took all of the things that he had received from his father, all of the things of his inheritance, and he callously just sells it all off and turns it into cash. Tries to get as much money as he can in a short amount of time. That's kind of his goal here. But let me illustrate it this way. Perhaps an illustration will help. So Rita's family lives just up the road. Okay, she's grown up the road. They have a house. Rita's parents have a house. It's about 5 miles up the road. A house in right around 40 acres or so. The family farm has been in the family for close to 100 years this year. Since 1919. Isn't that pretty cool? So imagine if Rita were to go up to her parents and say, hey, looks like you're still here, but I really kind of need some cash. And so she takes her portion of what she has coming to her and says, hey, I want it now. And then she sells everything and then goes to Vegas and blows it all in like 2 weeks. Sounds fun? Is that what you said?
Doesn't sound like me.
Doesn't sound like me. Okay. So that would be insulting, wouldn't it? That would be dishonoring to the entire family. Everybody would be like, did you hear what happened? And that would be a disgrace. Right? Well, that's what this son did. He had one thing on his mind. Freedom. That's it. He sold everything just to make a quick buck. Everything that the father had worked so hard to accumulate. The possessions, the land, all of those things, and they're gone. This prodigal son had one thing on his mind, freedom. He wanted to party hard with no concern for the future. So he heads off to the big city, makes a whole bunch of new friends, at least for a while, and he wastes it all away. His mindset was like, hey, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Right? He kind of had that kind of a mindset. The text tells us that he squandered it. That to squander, it just means to scatter. It's the image of just throwing his possessions to the wind. He threw away all of that money, and as he threw away his money, he also threw away his life. Imagine how it must have broken the father's heart. I'm sure that the father had so much greater plans for his son. He had so many great desires for his son, and he just squandered away. Even as earthly parents, we have great desires and great plans for our children, right? And squandering is the last word that we want to use to describe our kids or even our own life, that we just squandered it away and threw it away. So just to kind of summarize, he's like, listen, Dad, I wish you were dead. You're in the way of all my plans. You're a barrier. I want my freedom. I want out of this family. I have other plans, and these plans don't involve you. They don't involve this estate. They don't even involve this village. I want nothing to do with any of you. Give me my inheritance right now. I'm out of here. And then he goes on to live a life of sin. This scene that Jesus painted would have just shocked his audience. No one listening would have ever thought that this son was deserving of a comeback. And it all started with a chase. It all started with the prodigal son believing a lie, saying, listen, if I can just chase after wealth, if I can chase after pleasure, if I can chase after all of these things, it will satisfy me. And that chase led him to a distant place. A place with unfulfilled dreams, a place with heartache, a place of loss. It led him to a place of separation from his father, and it led him to a place of deep regret. Let me share something with you. This is going to be in your notes. It's going to be so profound that it's just going to knock your socks off. You're probably going to tell people about it all week long, I'm sure. It's going to be on Facebook, I'm sure. It's this. Chasing after something will lead you somewhere. That is so profound. Aren't you glad you came to church today? Like, some of you, you're not even writing it down. You're like, whatever. You know, it's like saying wherever you go, there you are. Right? Chasing after something will lead you somewhere. I know, it's amazing. Listen, when you chase after something, you don't remain in the same place that you once were. The chase always moves you somewhere. It always moves you. It will always lead you somewhere. The question that we need to kind of wrestle with is, where is it going to lead me? Where is this chase going to take me? Will the chase lead you to the right place, or will it lead you to the wrong place? This next phrase is also pretty profound. Chasing the wrong thing will lead you to the wrong place. I know, you're like, this is so obvious. Why did I even come today? Listen, this may seem so obvious, but it doesn't always seem so obvious when we're in the middle of it, does it? When we're in the middle of it, we find ourselves, and we ask ourselves the question, how did I get here? Because it wasn't obvious to us at the time. In fact, we have a saying, right? Well, it seemed like a good idea at the time. We always say that when we do something we regret later. Well, it seemed like a good idea at the time. See, chasing after the wrong thing will lead you to the wrong place. And sometimes it seems like an obvious thing, but we ask ourselves that question all the time. How did I end up here? Or another question we ask, or another statement will say, I never thought that it would happen to me. Or worse yet, I never thought it would happen to me again. I never thought it would happen to me again and again and again. How did this happen to me? It's because we believed a lie at some point in our life, and we chased after something that led us somewhere, and that led us to a place that we never wanted to go. See, chasing after the wrong thing will lead you to the wrong place, and it begins with the chase. And I think this is true in every aspect of life. If you chase after money, it will lead you to discontentment. If you chase after acceptance, it will lead you to making compromises. If you chase after an addiction, it will lead you to emptiness, always wanting more. If you chase after a wrong relationship, it will lead you to being heartbroken. Right? If you chase after a person, that's called stalking. It will lead you to jail. Right? It always leads you somewhere. The question is, where do you want this chase to leave you at and to lead you to? For the prodigal son, he chased after wealth and wild living, and it led him to, the text tells us, a distant country. He wanted to get as far away from the Father as possible. See, the chase begins when we buy the lie that says chasing after this thing will satisfy me. And when you chase the wrong thing, it leads you to the wrong place. For the next few minutes, I want to share a comeback story from someone who chased the wrong thing that led her to the wrong place. But since then, she's made an incredible comeback.
My name is Rachel, and this is my comeback story. Growing up, I went to church on Sunday with my family. My father was always involved in the leadership, and I don't remember a time when I didn't know who Jesus was. I was a happy child. I grew up in the comforts of a good home. My parents took in foster children, and from the time I was 4 until I was 16, my parents fostered 117 kids who lived with us. I was a quiet kid, but growing up in that type of environment with 3 natural-born siblings and 3 adopted siblings, I learned quick that being outgoing and making people laugh was a way to be heard. I was quite the prankster and always found a way to have a good time. When I was a teenager, I became pregnant with my first child. Of course, growing up in the home I lived in, I knew what I did was wrong, and I kept it a secret from most people. I only told a few of my friends, and they kept it a secret too. Some of them encouraged me to have an abortion, which I knew I could never do. So for 8 months, I hid my pregnancy. I was just scared all day, every day. I went through the motions. I wore baggy clothes and went to school as usual. I still played gym, and one girl I knew always stood in front of me while I changed so the other kids in class wouldn't see my belly. I was waiting for the baby to come and living in fear. I imagined myself giving birth in a bathroom stall on my own because I couldn't ever see telling my parents. Then one day I got into a huge fight with my sister Beth. She really didn't do anything wrong, but I really lashed out at her and just started beating her up. That's when my mom told me I was overreacting, and she asked if it was because I was failing gym class. I hesitated and told her that it was part of the reason because most days I wouldn't change my clothes for gym. I just was avoiding playing. She still didn't get it, but she kept crying, and I finally told her that I was pregnant. She freaked out and immediately told my dad. They asked me what my plan was, and I told them that I was going to give the baby up for adoption, not because I really deep down wanted to. I just thought that's what I should do, or they would want me to do. So they were okay with me giving the baby up for adoption, and that was the plan. One day I just remember sitting in my living room chair, and my mom came inside with a garbage bag over her shoulder, and she was carrying baby boy clothes in the bag. And at that time I had found out the sex of the child, and I asked her, why she brought the clothes in, and I asked her if I could keep the baby. So I remember my dad chiming in and saying that we don't give babies away in this family, we take them in. So at that point I decided that I was going to do it, and my parents were going to support me. So a month later, when I was 14 and a freshman in high school, I gave birth to my first son. I've looked back and often thought about my pregnancy, and I realized that I didn't get through the pregnancy on my own. God must have sent an angel who was with me through it all, because, it's hard. My family was supportive and helped me through one of the lowest points of my life, even after I gave birth. But even then, I still was just navigating through life and hoping for the best. At some point in my early teen years, I stopped attending church. I instead had every Friday night free and used that time to drink with my friends. Anytime when I was free from parenting, I drank and experimented with drugs. It all made me feel so included in a world where I was so different. A teen mom. I was having a good time, but when I wasn't partying, I was still trying to be the best person and mother I could be, and even thought of myself as a Christian. I felt like I was a good person, and but in my late teen years, as if I didn't learn anything from my earlier mistakes, I was once again pregnant out of wedlock with my second child. I was 20, a single mom with 2 children. Unfortunately, having drinks with friends became my lifestyle as an adult. Even after I was married, I went to the bars a lot. I juggled married life, kids, and went back to school. When my kids were young, my sister Margaret invited me to go to the Bolivar United Methodist Church. We wanted our kids to be in Sunday school. She said she thought it would be good for our kids to grow up with a better understanding of right from wrong, and it would help them make better choices when they were older. Her reasoning made sense, and I started attending with all 4 of my kids. And now this actually makes me laugh because God had much bigger plans. So thankful that I attended Bolivar United Methodist Church and eventually OCC. I remember very clearly the day a few years ago when I pulled into my driveway while listening to Dr. David Jeremiah on the radio. And I heard him saying that if God had a rope to pull you out of a hole, it wouldn't matter if the hole was 10 feet deep or 10,000 feet deep. He'll still pull you out of that hole. There's nothing too deep for him. I got out of my car and I walked through my house into my bedroom, and I just kept thinking about all the things I had done in my life so far. There were too many things to even list, and I was continuing to add to that list daily. I reached my bedroom and I was changing out of my work clothes to put something more comfortable on, and I remember just stopping and staring at my shoe rack, and all of a sudden I just prayed out loud, and God, I've been in a hole for years. I want you to pull me out of this hole because I'm not getting anywhere on my own. At this point I had been attending OCC for a couple of years, but after this day I decided I would finally take my sister Margaret up on the offer to join her small group on Wednesday nights at Pastor Dave's house. If you ask me then, I wouldn't necessarily say that I was on a downward spiral or anything like that. It was just like I knew that I was taking God for granted. It was as if I had always thought that someday I would take my relationship with Christ seriously, but someday. When I prayed that day, it was as if I had a paradigm shift. I knew that I couldn't move forward in my life without God being the leader. And the biggest thing was I knew that I would be okay because God could handle my past, knew my past. I was just handing over my future. Today, I'm more open and honest with people, and I don't get so angry anymore like I used to. I read the Bible, I serve in church, and still attend my small group. I think I've changed in many ways, but one thing that stands out in particular is when my second child, Delaney, needed her passport to go on a trip to Italy. She needed a copy of her birth certificate. Her father wasn't listed on the birth certificate that she had, and I wasn't expecting that I would have to list him on the new one. When the clerk at the town hall asked me to name him, I didn't know what to say. I just paused and said I'd rather not tell her. The clerk didn't understand and was not the friendliest when she told me that I needed to tell her, so I asked Delaney to go back out to the car, and when she left, I told the clerk that Delaney didn't know the father who raised her wasn't her biological father. This prompted me, with the help of my small group and their prayers, to finally tell Delaney the truth about who her real father was. I used to make jokes about how I've done everything backwards. I got pregnant, I got married, and then I went to school. I did this to myself. I chose a hard path that I'd never want to relive, but I would never give it back. The past couple of years, I've reflected on the way I was living. I have so many things I'm thankful for that are a result of this. I have a son who's a hardworking man now and is a productive and contributing member of society. And my other 3 children love being a part of OCC. I pray for my kids every day. I am walking with Christ. He welcomed me back without hesitation when the time was right.
Don't you love comeback stories? Comeback stories. When it seemed like somebody was too far away, when they were in a distant place, and yet God welcomed them back. That's the comeback. One of the things I want us to realize is that this church is filled with those stories. Isn't it? It's filled with stories of people that have gone to distant places, that have distanced themselves from God, oftentimes intentionally, and yet God has welcomed them back. What an awesome Heavenly Father we have. How He steps in when we're in the middle of that distant place, and He offers us a comeback. I love that line that Rachel shared when she quoted David Jeremiah. He said, if God had a rope, right? If God had a rope to pull you out of a hole, it would not matter if the hole was 10 feet deep or 10,000 feet deep. He would still pull you out. There's nothing too deep for Him. That's so true. He has seen it all. Right? He has seen it all, and He's welcomed people back into His arms over and over and over again. That's who our God is. That's who His character is. And I love how Rachel recognized that in her story. She said that she knew that she was in that hole, and she prayed, God, I've been in a hole for years. I want you to pull me out of this hole because I'm not getting anywhere on my own. Thank you for sharing your story. It's incredible. And here's the thing. That's not just Rachel's story. That's all of our stories. All of our stories are like that. That we could never pull ourselves out of the hole that we willingly climbed ourselves into. We've all chased after something that left us in a hole. Every one of us. For the prodigal son, he chased after something. He chased after money. He chased after wealth. He chased after a way of living that he thought would bring him happiness. And it led him to a distant place. In that distant place, he was bankrupt, both physically and, more importantly, he was bankrupt spiritually. It kind of reminds me of another person in the New Testament that chased after something that they thought would be the best thing for their lives. In fact, they chased after money. And although this person I'm going to talk about in just a minute wasn't bankrupt physically, he was certainly bankrupt spiritually. Until he experienced a comeback. His name is Zacchaeus, and I just want to look at his story real quick. It's just in Luke 19, just over a couple pages, page 852. We'll look at Zacchaeus' story. And while Zacchaeus didn't squander his wealth, he did chase after that. He chased after a lie that said, if I can have enough money, if I can have enough wealth, I will be satisfied. But it never met his greatest need. Luke 19. Beginning of verse 1, it says this, that Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through, and a man was there by the name of Zacchaeus, and he was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. And he wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. No, I just get a kick out of that. Some say he was a wee little man. I'm not sure if that's politically correct or not. So he ran ahead and he climbed up a sycamore fig tree to see him, and Jesus was coming that way, or since Jesus was coming that way. And when Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and he said to him, Zacchaeus, come down. I know I wanted to put a U in there for some reason. I can't figure it out. Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. Someone should write a song about this. It will really help me remember this so much better. For those of you that are new to church, there's a kids song about this that maybe we'll sing it sometime. I'll get Brody working on it. Brody's already shaking his head. Before I can even look at him, he's like, no, we're not. We're not singing it. I practiced it earlier this week. I thought, well, maybe, I'm not going to sing it for you. So the story goes on. So he came down, Zacchaeus came down at once and welcomed him gladly. And all the people saw this and they began to mutter, he has gone to be the guest of a sinner. You know, in kind of the context that we're talking about, they would have said, he's gone to be the guest of the prodigal son. He's gone to his house. Verse 8 says, but Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount. And Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house. There's the comeback. Because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man, referring to himself, the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. One of my favorite verses in Scripture is right there. The Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. See, Zacchaeus experienced a comeback. An incredible comeback. For decades, Zacchaeus chased after the wrong thing. He chased after something that he thought would fulfill him. He chased after money. See, I seriously doubt that Zacchaeus, when he was a little boy, too many short jokes coming to my mind right now. He had dreams of becoming a little man one day, right? So Zacchaeus, I'm sure he did not think that when he becomes a man, I'm sure he was never thinking, someday I want to become a tax collector. He wouldn't have thought that at all, because tax collectors were traitors to their own countrymen, right? They cheated people out of what little bit of money they had. They were despised and they were hated. The thing that tax collectors had was money, and they had lots of it. And Zacchaeus, he chased after money. He wanted it. He chased after wealth. And then he experienced a comeback. And you know what the turning point of the story was? Is when he began to chase after Jesus instead. His chase made a turnaround. Here's the third thing maybe for your notes is this, is that chasing the right thing will lead you to the right place. And that's also obvious, right? Chasing the right thing will lead you to the right place. Zacchaeus experienced a comeback in his life, and his life was forever changed when he began to follow Jesus. And even before that, Jesus chased after him, and Jesus called to him. And this comeback changed his life so radically that he put his money where his mouth was. And while he was short in stature, he wasn't short in faith. He trusted Jesus completely, to the point where he said, listen, I will give half of everything I have away right now. And if I've cheated people, and you better believe he did, because that's one of the things the tax collectors could do. They could charge whatever they wanted for taxes. As long as Rome got what they wanted, they were fine. And then they could make whatever kind of profit that they wanted. He said, I will pay back 4 times whatever I cheated anybody out of. He had a radical life transformation there. So chasing the right thing will lead you to the right place. When you chase the wrong thing, it leads us to the wrong place. And the chase begins when we buy that lie that says, chasing after this thing, whatever that thing is, it will satisfy me. And you can fill in the blank with whatever that thing is that you find yourself chasing from time to time. Maybe it's money or sex or alcohol or acceptance. Maybe it's fame or a particular physique or power or approval or drugs or food or pleasure or a relationship. Whatever that thing is that you put in there. You think that that's going to satisfy you? It won't satisfy you. So the question for each of us is, what are you chasing after? What am I chasing after? And when we ask, or when we find ourselves in that position and we want to know, do I really want to come back? Do I want to come back from that? Then we have to ask the question, what lie have I been believing? What lie have I been believing? See, the lie says chasing after this thing will satisfy me. So if that's the lie, what's the truth? Here's the truth. The truth is this. Chasing after God will satisfy you. Chasing after God will satisfy you. we have to replace that desire with something. God says when we delight ourselves in Him, when we make Him the thing that we pursue, the thing that we chase after, He says when we delight ourselves in Him, He will give us the desires of our heart. He begins to satisfy those needs. Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount that, that we're blessed if we hunger and thirst for righteousness, for then we will be filled. Then we'll be satisfied when we have a desire to do what's right. See, God longs for us to long for Him. His desire for us is that we would desire Him. I love that line from Rachel's story when she said, I knew that I couldn't move forward in my life without God being the leader. So, in other words, as long as I'm chasing after my own thing, it's not going to work out. I need somebody else to lead me. So she says, I knew that I couldn't move forward in my life without God being the leader. And then she said, and the biggest thing was this, I knew that I would be okay because God could handle my past. He knew my past. I was just handing over my future. That's a change in the chase. See, God wants us to hand over our future by allowing Him to lead us as we chase after Him. So what are you chasing after? It's a fair question for each of us. Doesn't matter where we are in our spiritual life. You may think, I'm a follower of Jesus, so I'm clearly following Jesus, right? I'm chasing after. Oh, really? In every area of your life, are you following Jesus the way that He would have you follow Him? What area of your life aren't you quite committed to following Him? Have you ever come to that position where you've asked Jesus to not only be the forgiver of your sin, but also the leader of your life? Have you given God not only your past, but also your future? It makes a difference, doesn't it? God wants us to chase after Him. See, I believe that God has a great future for us. When we chase after Him, I think that the future is perfect. That His plans are perfect for us. That they're tailor-made for us. And no matter what our past is, Jesus holds our future. And even if you feel like you're lost and drowning, Jesus Himself told Zacchaeus that He came to seek and save the lost. Amen. So you're in just the right place. There isn't a hole too deep that God can't pull us out of. It's not too late. You're never too far. Amen. Aren't you so thankful for that?